There is a shift happening in the watch industry. And in my opinion, the watch industry is trying to destroy dealers. In this video, I'm going to be kind of covering what's going on in the industry and why dealers are under so much pressure now more than ever to adapt, change the way they do business, or unfortunately be left behind. But guys, before we do that, please do not forget to check out chronograbs.com, where you can buy and sell watches at 0% commission. This is my site that I've launched as a project really just to kind of foster this community that we have here, enable people to buy and sell watches 0% commission, get better deals because there's no commission involved, and also, sell their watches for more because they don't have to charge a commission on a platform like an eBay or Chrono24. So make sure to go over to chronograbs.com and check it out. So what's going on in the watch industry? There's a couple of points that we need to cover here, but essentially dealers are under so much pressure right now. It really starts with the trajectory of what's happened with the watch market. I won't go into it too much here, but the short of it is, we saw this massive peak of watch value and demand that happened through COVID, things like, money printing and so many other factors, and also people kind of being locked up during the lockdowns and having not as much to do with their time besides, indulge in their hobbies, which included watch collecting. We also saw kind of a lot of buzz around watches coming from things like the Wall Street Journal and other publications that were, in my opinion, kind of pushing this FOMO, this fear of missing out on, hey, you better get a Rolex watch now because they're double, triple price and they'll be quadruple tomorrow. As many of us, probably most of us know by now, if you're watching these videos, the prices have come down substantially and demand has as well. But there's another factor that's also making things a little more difficult for seasoned dealers in the space, and that is there were many dealers that were new to watch dealing that wanted to kind of join in the career path that stemmed from kind of all of this buzz. People watch channels like this, or me over at Del Rey or Federico, or so many others out there that, were doing pretty well trading watches, and you could see it all happening live, in some cases for some dealers, online. And so more people got in. They wanted to make their hobby, essentially their career path, and I commend them for that. But what has happened is because there's been such a pullback in demand and prices, now you have so many more times the amount of dealers, which has increased substantially the competitiveness. Now, when you pair that with what's going on with these watch trading platforms that are charging commissions, it becomes so tricky. Now, let me explain. You have companies like eBay and Chrono24 and others that offer this authenticity checking as well as guarantees on their platform. And so now you have a situation where anyone can become a watch dealer in a sense, right? Because as a private collector, you could go on to eBay, Chrono24, list a watch for sale. Now, with watches, people generally want to trust who they're buying from because they want to know that it's authentic. They want to know that the watch has been gone through several processes for timekeeping, waterproofness, authenticity, making sure the box and the papers match, all of those things. They want to know that their purchase is going to be secured and they're not going to get ripped off. And so you have platforms like eBay, like Chrono24, which have offered and started offering increasingly these types of services for the buyer. And what that means is now it's really not a big deal to buy from a private party. If you go on eBay and you just sort the watches for sale by price lowest to highest, if the conditions are about the same, why would a buyer not buy from a private party? Because it's going through a verified service center. It's, in the case of eBay, it's going through a service center that services some pretty notable brands in the US, and they have dozens and dozens of watchmakers. And so these platforms have de-risked the watch buying experience if purchasing from a private party. And what that has created is watch dealers trying to compete on price with private parties. And the basics of it is it's really not too possible, right? How can you have all this overhead and staff and need to take professional photos and all of this? How can a dealer do this and still compete with someone that just wants to get out of their watch, right? If you're a watch collector, you're just done with your watch, you want to sell it, well, you've got kind of two options: sell it yourself or sell it to a dealer. And the dealer needs to buy it lower because they need to be able to make a profit and pay for all those expenses. And it's going to sit, it's going to age, it's going to sit on the shelf, it's going to tie up their capital. They have to kind of look at the opportunity cost, the cost of their capital if they're borrowing. Interest rates are higher right now, so that makes it difficult to kind of stock inventory sometimes unless the prices are low. Now, we could also factor in things like the value of the US dollar if we wanted to get specific about the US market and talk about how, the margins really aren't there like they used to be for importing watches from places like Japan or Hong Kong or other parts of the world like Italy. But kind of the basic here, the underlying premise is you have kind of the large players funded by capital, in some cases publicly traded like eBay, that have been willing to offer so much to collectors and even dealers, honestly, just to get the deal, that in the short term, it doesn't really matter if they're making a whole lot of money on this particular segment, because eventually, as others kind of fall off, as some of the dealers or the traders, they fall off because, they're just not able to make it in current market situations like they were at the peak of the market. Some of the more newer unseasoned dealers, they'll have to move on to doing other things. They'll have to make or meet their financial obligations just to live in other ways, jobs and so forth. And so kind of what we see here is this perfect storm of where everyone is trying to make the money off of the dealers as well as to cut into the dealers' margins. And unfortunately, I don't think this is sustainable if everything remains constant, right? Why would a collector ever sell to a dealer if they could just sell it themselves and be able to offer, through the services of a platform like eBay, the same protection, if not greater, than a dealer can offer you separately, not using the platform? Now, I know there is something to be said about dealers selling on these platforms, and that really comes in handy when the watch that someone wants is not available from a private party. We have to remember that selling the watch as a collector does take work. You got to take photos. You have to make sure the photos are clear enough. You have to, make sure to properly show little nuances, and then you have to field questions, right? If there's one thing that I know is that many watch collectors ask a lot of questions before buying the watch, and they're going to be more likely to ask more questions from a private seller just to make sure that they're saving themselves the headache of having to send the watch back or not kind of knowing what it is that they're buying. And so really, where do I think it's going from here? No one has a crystal ball, and so I can't give you a definitive answer of what I think's truly going to happen with the watch market. But I'll say this: I think watch dealers that have been doing this a long time are going to be fine. Sure, we're not at the peak of the market as we were during the COVID time period, but we're even before that kind of mass surge. The veteran dealers that know how to adapt and know how to stock different inventory pieces, or to stock what's going to sell, or to be able to do kind of pull different levers in the business, those are going to be the ones that survive. And, maybe the people that entered late, maybe the people that are in these endless amounts of Facebook groups trading and flipping watches where, they're kind of, bridging the gap between wholesale and retail. Maybe some of these people will just kind of, dwindle out just because of the amount of competition, as well as how difficult that these platforms have made it for, either newer collectors or those that don't have a reputation to make a sustainable good living doing this. But guys, I just wanted to share with you my thoughts here of kind of how I see this unfold. I don't think it's doom and gloom. In fact, I think this is a great opportunity for those of you out there that would like to buy a watch because the prices are so much lower than they used to be. I'm always myself on the hunt for great deals. I see them every day. And so kind of in summation here, I would just leave you with, if there is a watch you've been on the fence about, I think now could be a really great time to buy one, especially before we see in the US maybe some rate cuts here that might start pushing up the prices of watches going into the future. Guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to see it and hear it. And we'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P.